computer. Good afternoon, evening, anybody who's tuning in. My guest today is a person that I've wanted to reach out to for quite a long time, who I studied many recordings of in undergrad and graduate school playing the guitar. This guy has really a massive volume of work, but it's not just one particular style of work. He's got recordings, compositions, arrangements, publications. He's at all the different festivals you could ever wish to be a part of. And he's the head of guitar at the University of Toronto. Mr. Jeffery McFadden, thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Oh, Ben, it's great to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation. Thanks for having me.
So one of the first things I ask everybody, and this question came because of the quarantine, so it had a different meaning then. I was saying, what are you doing now during quarantine? But since things have gotten a little bit better, I guess I'll just open up with, what are you doing now that things are getting back in, good live performances are happening more often. Life is probably a little bit back to normal. What are you up to these days?
Well, I'm one of the lucky few that, the quarantine didn't have an enormous effect on me. I mean, it had an enormous effect on a lot of people, but, I was able to work from home. I was able to do a few kind of recorded concerts and kind of that sort of thing, webinars and other things. So coming out of it, I find it's kind of a slower crawl, but kind of getting back to normal. So there was a day not that many years ago when I would go to, maybe a dozen festivals in every summer, and travel quite a bit in the summer. This year, I'm really only doing a couple things. So as we talked about before, I was in Connecticut recently at a festival, and I have done a couple of other events and webinars and kind of workshops and that kind of thing. So it's slowly kind of getting back to normal. And I'm looking forward to the moment when things really are, completely settled again. We'll see when that happens.
Yeah, yeah. Let's move back because I'd love to talk about all of the wonderful things you've accomplished, but let's just go over kind of a loose understanding of how guitar came to you. How did you start playing this instrument?
Well, we have to go way back, actually, for me. I'm talking way back. So, I mean, as long as I kind of, came online and can remember, I've been interested in it. So I think it started with a family thing. My family are not musicians at all. There's not, there are no musicians, artists in my family, but everyone loves music. And so a couple of things. In my immediate home, my folks were always playing music, and my dad was a kind of a nifty, still is kind of a nifty guy. He was able to create things and put projects together. He had a really nice stereo system. He used to play recordings all the time. And a couple of things that I think, if I can recall back, must have struck me is like one was he would play these recordings from the early 60s, which were Antonio Carlos Jobim, Stan Getz, right? And on those recordings also was Joao Gilberto. So the music that I heard there had guitar in it, and it was sort of present and forward in the music. And the other one, believe it or not, was Johnny Cash. So the notion of a guy standing up there with a big dreadnought guitar and kind of communicating with that sort of force and stuff. It was just something that was really kind of inspiring to my sort of 4-year-old brain. So I started to beat the drum right away, like, Dad, I need a guitar. Give me a guitar. Can I have a guitar? Please give me a guitar. So finally, after a few, that seemed like forever, a guitar was brought to me. And so it's a kind of a long story. I won't go over it in this much detail. It'll take a year to tell the story. But anyways, I got a guitar at a very young age and just was kind of thrashing away at it. Finally, it was kind of possible to set up some lessons for me, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I suppose. And it kind of carried on from there. So that's the origins. It goes back that far.
Were you studying when you had lessons? Were you studying the classical tradition at that point, or was it more of just, here's a C chord, here's a D chord, this is how you strum along?
Yeah, actually, I mean, it had nothing to do with classical guitar at all at the beginning. I didn't start classical guitar formal lessons until I was 16.
Hmm.
So I was lucky though that my main teacher in that first early period was this guy called Eric Golding. He was in my community,
Hmm.
and he was just a very, very capable teacher, and it kind of, just a kind of guy that hung up a shingle in his neighborhood. But he, taught theory and all the stuff that should go along with kind of a rounded musical education. Taught any number of styles and was kind of very competent in a number of styles. He helped kind of in. He would make arrangements if I wanted to kind of learn to play something.
Wow.
So it was really, really excellent lessons. I was very fortunate in that way to have that kind of start. And what happened was I sort of became, I played in bands and stuff in high school, rock bands and metal bands and that kind of stuff, such as they were. And, in a way, like it was fun, but it just seemed like very limiting. And I kind of got a little bit frustrated with it. I think this is a story that probably, is part of the common consciousness of so many guitarists. Like just a lot of folks kind of come to it this way. And so my teacher, Eric Golding, recommended a classical guitar teacher in town who was also very uh, capable teacher in the sense that she had set me up. Her name was Gabrielle Kish. She had set me up to both, get into the Royal Conservatory examination system. I took a couple of exams, and she set me up for a university audition. And so that's how that proceeded after that. So yeah, no, for me it was no, I wasn't one of those people that started right off the bat with classical, but rather did kind of a little bit of jazz, rock music, mostly folk music. I remember sitting there spinning the Led Zeppelin 4 back and forth so I could try to learn the guitar solos, so many of us did. And I mean, it's one thing to say that, but I think my experience is that it has been, that was enormously helpful to me
Right.
in my kind of eventual career where I've landed, just in terms of ear development, in terms of kind of organic interaction with the fretboard, we would work a lot, as like rock guitars with patterns and
Right.
various things, and sort of an explorative sense of the instrument was nurtured then. So it would have been great to start like with as some folks did, very young, on the classical guitar. It might have given us some advantage, but at the same time, I think there were a lot of advantages to taking that other pathway.
I actually can relate to that a lot because I too came to classical guitar much later than others. I started when I was 21 or 22, and I had at that time, a little 5 to 7 year career of playing rock music and metal music and really difficult things on the electric guitar. And I agree with you. There was a certain element to it that was limiting. I would say the depth, the the scope of electric guitar and metal guitar and that kind of stuff is really it's long, right? Like there's different things that you can do that other instruments can't do. And I was a big Dream Theater fan,
Mm-hmm.
and like copying them was like that's no joke, right? Like trying to play that kind of stuff is no joke.
Not at
But
all.
there's a certain depth to it that doesn't exist because I don't know, because of the nature of the instrument, because of how you read and interpret the instrument. Based, I think what the electric guitar community is missing, and maybe it's different now. I've been out of the loop for a while. Is like a consistent way of learning, like a good pedagogy, right? Because you have people like John Petrucci and Steve Vai that could do these wonderful things. And then it's like, well, how do you do that? And there's not really a good sequence of how to do that. But one thing that you said that I really like is that the electric guitar gives you a lot of confidence because you know what modes are, because you can improvise, because there's a lot of stuff there that doesn't necessarily come with the classical guitar.
Exactly.
So I appreciate you saying that because it took me a long time. I'm almost 35, and it took me, I'm starting at 21, 22, playing the Brower studies poorly and thinking, oh, I wish I was like this guy that's also in school with me who's been playing since he was 12, right? But it took me a while to realize that I had a gift too. It was just it just had a different sort of set of payments that go along with like a different it was hidden. It was a hidden blessing. That's
Exactly.
wonderful. So I'm glad to hear that somebody that has done so much found that transition. And so you started studying classical guitar. I read that you did compete in several competitions. One of them was the GFA long ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. I was doing a calculation the other day. Like, it seems like it was only yesterday that competition. It was, 30 years ago. I think this is the 30-year mark, actually, 2022. So it was 1992 that I
What
was in.
did what did competitions do for you as a person and as a musician? You don't have to get into specifics of what it was like then, but just what did it do for you?
Well, I can say I mean, I didn't really do a lot of competitions. I did some local ones, and I did the GFA, just that only once. I wasn't a big kind of competition mercenary warrior like others, but
Mhm.
um, uh, very directly for me, it opened up the possibility in the gateway to my recording career. So it was very, very important because um, right at that time, um, Naxos, and this is a whole other story that we can get into, but my one of my main teachers, Norbert Kraft, became kind of absolutely premier recording technician and producer. And it was right at the very beginning of his association with Naxos that it coincided with me getting a prize in that competition. And so one of the things was that they wanted to give an award to the winner among the other awards, the tours and the money and everything else that comes with it to the prize winners, was a recording with Naxos.
Mhm.
So um, I had also at the time received a grant, sort of coincidentally, to do a recording. It was going to be a recital recording. So it turned out that Norbert would record it, but Naxos wasn't interested so much at that time. Their model was not to have sort of recital recordings, but rather it was a kind of cataloging exercise, right? Where they wanted, like, every single piece by Schumann that's ever been written and every single piece by X and Y and Z, rather than sort of mixed bag albums. So the idea was, it was CDs. You could kind of put them in a rack in the store, and along the spine, you could see who the composer was and what the piece was. And it was just like a library. And that was sort of the notion of what they wanted to do. So this idea that they would have recordings of varied art, of varied compositions and varied programs was something that they was not in their model, and they kind of needed to be convinced about it. So the idea came up that this should be uh, a laureate series, right? And so that mine was the first in that series, actually. And then from there on, I mean, I think it's still going on. There's been dozens and dozens of really kind of important recordings, I think, debut recordings of the GFA winners, Targa competition winners, and others as well, right? So for me, it opened that up. And then Norbert, I already had a pre-existing connection with him, but we worked really super well together.
Mhm.
And Naxos at one point said to him, I think Norbert asked the question, what should I do? What's my scope here? And Naxos basically said, like, everything, do everything. you know and so Norbert was like, wow, where do we start? And so it was Soar, right? We started with Soar. I did a couple of the recordings. There was a number of other artists that contributed to that, and finally, just a few years ago, that series was finished.
Wow.
So that's for me, and the recording and that association with that record company was very, very helpful. I mean, at the time, this is a long time ago, it was an extraordinary opportunity, just because of the, if nothing else, because of the distribution. Of course, the quality of the recordings was
Right.
exceptional, and it was done in such an amazingly professional way. And not everyone had access, of course, at that point, to that kind of technology. It was very expensive. It took a lot of expertise.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so I was able to get like a super high quality recording. Plus, it was distributed globally, right? And so my option, if it wasn't to go with Naxos, was to kind of produce it and manufacture it myself and sell it out of the back of my, the trunk of my car. And so this was like a really extraordinary opportunity. It came with a lot of reviews, and it came with a lot of attention that you might expect from that sort of global exposure. So the GFA, I guess, was for me the gateway, one of the gateways into that, very lucky and fortunate circumstance that I was able to participate in.
Isn't that interesting how things work out career wise, where you go into something for one purpose and then something beautiful happens that you wouldn't have been able to expect or even prepare for? I think that's wonderful. And Norbert Kraft is, I mean, behind at least 75% of my favorite classical guitar albums. I can just
Yeah,
guess which one, you know what I mean? Like I look on the back of a Barwaco CD, I'm like, oh, Norbert Kraft, or like, you know, or a lot of the Naxo CDs or whatever.
yeah,
Read a really good interview with him about omnidirectional microphones, super nerdy stuff. But he was talking about the, you know, what he chooses, and I guess when you have that kind of equipment at your disposal, you can just set 20 different microphones up and see what sounds the best.
yeah. He is extraordinary at that. He had the resources, but he's also sort of this quiet genius that
Yeah. Yeah.
is behind so much of what's in the air. You never hear much from him. He sort of does his work, and he's not a lot in the public, but he has, and it's kind of knowing that kind of technical stuff too. But as a producer, especially, it's really, really extraordinary what he brings to it. I mean, I can't imagine. I've done all my recordings with him essentially.
Yeah.
A couple aside, but I can't imagine a better circumstance for a performer in that situation than to work with Norbert. I mean, he kind of is just it's really extraordinary. So lucky.
And not to gloss over the fact that as a young musician, uh, preparing for a recording is something that you have to learn how to do. So learning that at a young age, and then I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that probably helped you in your discovery of yourself as a live performer, because you learn how to prepare a certain way for a recording and then realize, oh, there's a whole lot of this that I can transfer over to the stage.
Hmm. Yes, that's true. I discovered sort of slowly as doing any number of these recordings that there is a different way of kind of preparing for these recordings. And once you've been in a session, you realize the value of kind of the stamina that you have to bring to the situation, right? So a concert is sort of like a burst of energy, right, for which you've prepared you know any number of like hours and hours and hours and hours and perfected things and got things, but it's a burst of energy, and it has with it um, kind of a different paradigm. There's the excitement of the kind of live moment. There's the communication with the audience. There's a number of things that distinguish it from a recording where you play the same passage like 10 times, right?
Right,
And
right.
you have to sort of, the producer will say, stop there, can you pick it up in bar X? And so you have to realize, not just, okay, I can start in bar X, that's fine, professionals can do that, but like, where am I in my dynamic stream at that point? Where am I in the crescendo?
Right, right.
And the sort of consistency of the way that you are supposed to, that you need to be able to play both with rhythmic precision and the microscopic kind of rhythmic control, dynamic control and expressive control, and trying to kind of have such a clear idea and a kind of have a practiced execution in that specific way of doing a passage that makes it possible to put the record together in an edited form that sounds like you want it to sound, right?
Right.
So it's difficult to finally control that. Now, I mean, there's editing involved, but there's no way that you can get the end result that you want unless you can really play it perfectly over and over and over again, right? So it requires, a concentration. It requires a kind of intensity of listening and a kind of awareness of what it is that you're doing. So some of these kind of broad, sort of emotive gestures that we often would find and exaggerate upon and maybe, manipulate in the course of a live performance, in a recorded performance, you still want to have that spark of kind of creativity and sort of spontaneity,
Mhm.
but at the same time, there's just another level of kind of interpretive control and execution that's required in a recording. And so, I mean, in a way, they do sort of pollinate one another, but at the same time, I see them as somewhat distinct.
Right, right. Yeah. How did all of these arrangements come to be, especially of Bach, when everybody and their mother has an arrangement and everybody's done one? What was the what was the genesis of creating your own publication of the arrangements? Was it something where you just had your fingerings and were like, I'm going to put this out there, or did you want to say something new?
Well, that would be the only reason for doing it. I mean, there are a lot of great arrangements of the pieces that I have tended to play and arrange
Mhm.
already out there. So yeah, my sense of it was that I see Bach as uh, really being anchored by two very, very important things. I mean, this is nothing kind of spectacularly innovative to think, but the motivic structure of the music
Mhm.
and counterpoint, right? So uh, a couple things like uh, to me, the first Bach that I played, like as an undergraduate, I played like kind of all the lute suites, I think, right? And they're hard to play, um, like all Bach is. But then I came to feel that this kind of string music was our actually more natural for us. I mean, we think of the lute suites as well. Okay, they are probably closer to us because it's a plucked string instrument, but in fact they're further from us. They're keyboard works, right? And the cello. So what we have to do is kind of reduce them by arrangement in order to make them really work. You're dropping a lot of important and interesting internal voices, and it's hard to make everything connect in the right way. We take the cello and lute music, the cello and violin music, and it's a process of expanding, or not really expanding as much as sort of illuminating what's already there in the implicit counterpoint,
Mhm.
right? So my thinking about Bach was really focused on that and really trying to make sort of a clarity in the voices that I think is beyond what can be done on the original instruments.
Do
So
you
that's something kind of maybe heretical to say. I mean, I love the way that they're played the cello suites on cello. I mean, there's a kind of level of expressiveness of resonance which we can never hope to kind of uh, uh, even come close to. But what we can do is to kind of separate the music into its parts in a much clearer way, right? And so I saw for me that was the sort of main sort of driving force. It's kind of realizing that implicit counterpoint. And then so in arranging them, you can kind of show that in the staff, right? And kind of be very, very explicit about it. And I have my own ideas about fingering, but the fingering is kind of designed around making um, the counterpoint work in a way that sort of is, I was very inspired by Glenn Gould, and just the way that counterpoint is so forward in his playing. And that to me, that kind of luminous clarity in the counterpoint was the thing that I wanted to put forward. I'm sure others have thought about this before, but that's my reason for having spent so much time and energy in making specific arrangements of the cello suites in particular.
if there was any player of ever alive or not alive to illustrate the concept of counterpoint, Glenn Gould would certainly be one of them. uh
Mm-hmm.
Really, really incredible. Do you know, actually, this is a question for you. Do you I know the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro was written for the Lautenwerk, the keyboard instrument. Were the lute suites as well, or were those on his lutes? Because I know he owned a couple. Do we know if they were written on the lute or was it on the keyboard instrument?
My sense is that they were keyboard. I mean, the first lute suite maybe would be the one in quite like the E minor one, the way we play in E minor. Maybe uh, it's just that one particularly. I mean, sometimes it's very thin textures, the bouret and all that kind of stuff. You look at the Courant, for example, in that suite, and it's like I've got a level of density that we just can't sort of really execute, I think, on the guitar. So to me, it's a keyboard piece. And the fourth one is a violin piece, and the third one is a cello suite, and all that kind of stuff. So um, I think I taught my first student there almost 30 years ago. So
Wow.
I was teaching one student at that point. So
Yeah.
it's been there, and then I was a student there as well. So I'm sort of pretty embedded at this point at U of T. So, and I'm, very, very pleased about having had that long association with that kind of really great institution.
Do you encourage your students to compose and arrange?
Uh, it comes about naturally. I mean, I don't need to encourage them. Some are interested in it. Some are more interested really just in kind of guitar execution, becoming interpreters and becoming these, performers. I tried to give them the sense that they shouldn't lock in, and they shouldn't feel that they shouldn't cut out a little time to at least experiment and try. But I tried to build this kind of sense of organic approach to the instrument, and a sort of more exploratory kind of ethos through fretboard harmony, right? And this is another one of my sort of big projects, as we talked about earlier, like, we both, you and I, have had this advantage of coming kind of from a rock background and all the good things that we mentioned that come with that. But still, even having that in place, and even more so if you don't have that in place, I think the transition into learning the classical guitar, and the sort of pre-college preparation that comes with it sort of puts all that aside. There's such an emphasis on, and an important emphasis on, literacy, right? Being able to kind of look at something, some dots on the page, and kind of make music out of it. That what happens is it just becomes sort of, a finger dance as we learn our pieces. I mean, you kind of really don't see what's going on, especially in so much of the music that we play that's kind of based on this common practice, harmony, right? So that was another important part of my teaching, was to make sure that the students have access to this kind of course and information where they understand what's going on under the fingers and are thinking on their feet as they play, and can work on things that don't have to be necessarily written down. That's sort of a combination of what the fingers are doing and what the mind is doing, and kind of thinking on two levels and being able to execute in this similar way that a sort of jazz guitarist would, or a rock guitarist might.
Right. It seems like a lot of times, and this is not any disrespect toward music school or theory professors or even guitar teachers, because there's such a limited amount of time in the day and where you need to be in 4 years or 2 years or 3 years.
Exactly.
But it seems like a lot of the schooling, a lot of guitar school is about is pieces and technique first, and sometimes it feels like the theory, not even theory in a conceptual sense, but in a practical physical sense, is somewhat ancillary, or just like you get what you, it's like a drive-by theory, like maybe you learn about the modes, maybe you don't, I think it wasn't Pat Metheny, it was somebody. I remember somebody came to the University of Hartford, and I missed it. It was a very good jazz guy, famous guy. I'm sure I'll remember as soon as we hang up. And he said in the class, this was told to me because I wasn't there, he said, the piano is an instrument of addition, the guitar is an instrument of multiplication. And so that to me felt like it rang true, because you have all these rules about harmony and theory down here, and they're true as you move up the fretboard, but you have to do a bit of work, because things have to be transposed, and intervals, and one string is tuned differently, and you have all of these different rules. So it's nice and it's refreshing to hear that somebody thinks that you see what was important from that rock guitar world. I'm going to ask you something a little, just because I think you're going to have a great answer to this, and it's something you said before. You said more students and players, some of your students and players are focused on, like much of us, guitar execution. And I want to ask you this question. Do you think the field of classical guitar is too focused on playing this kind of stuff that deals more with hitting the notes quickly and less about art?
I think that if you look across the sort of variety of instruments that are typically used in composing art music, right, you're going to have a significant range of expressive capacity and expressive practice. So the narrative always has been for us, because guitarists, we tend to sort of look at our own thing very much, and stay in our own lane, and kind of don't look outside it very much. So we could easily kind of say that this kind of, let's call it for the moment, overemphasis on perfection and execution comes with a corresponding shrinking of the expressive voice of the instrument. And I think to some extent that may be true, right? But I also think that the guitar has just sort of got this, if you're playing it the right way, it's got this kind of sweet, arpeggio kind of sound, and that's sort of where it best fits as it ergonomically kind of sits in your hands. And that's what kind of happens. You put the guitar in the hands of someone, that's what they're going to do, right? So if you look at the expressive capacity of a violin, for example, right? Put that in the hands of an amateur. Very shortly, they will be able to play with this kind of really forward, expressive, they can do the vibrato and their, portmanteaus and everything that they're doing naturally. And just the kind of piercing quality of the instrument, it comes out expressive, all right? And even at the professional ranks, the violin is the most expressive, or the strings, aside from the voice maybe, but they're so expressive. They have the dynamic range. And the kind of expressiveness is built into the ergonomics of playing it. On the guitar, it's just not like that. So we have to really sort of amplify what we do in terms of expressiveness to be even close to that. And it's possible that we will never get, like even the most professional guitarists can't match that, right? If you look at the flute, for example, also in comparison to the violin, same issue, right? Flutists, greatest flutists in the world, are just not as expressive as the violinists are, right? And the string players are. So I see it as kind of a different thing. However, what you are suggesting is, I think that it's important for us as teachers to kind of to have our students understand the comparative levels of expressiveness. So, why is guitar thought of as like, oh, that's kind of, I like the guitar, yeah, it's very nice, but weird, it's not really kind of part of the mainstream. It's because it's just so different in that way. And like, if we can kind of make kind of broader gestures, then that brings us closer. And I think that's something that you may be right, we just kind of don't do or we kind of let that go, that kind of falls as an expense to maybe making clarity in our playing, which is absolutely essential as well. So but given that the level of guitar playing generally has come so far, and there's thousands and thousands of fantastic guitarists who never make a mistake anymore, right? Then certainly we can kind of, I think, start to light up that other side of our playing as a collective, right? To sort of play with more expressiveness, more kind of articulation, especially, right? Is something I think guitarists don't do with kind of the same level of consciousness. Violinists, again, do that. Their whole thing is articulation, right? Every kind of two notes, they think like, how is this one connected to the one before, right? And that's everything. And it's done with great explicitness, and it's kind of marked in, and that's kind of the force of, dealt with great force in the pedagogy and how people do that. So, I mean, we've got other things to do also. We've got to play the bass line too, and we've got to, navigate this incredibly sort of labyrinthine fretboard and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, if there's one place where I really think that it's important to focus, and I try to direct my students to do this, is to listen to the articulation, because guitarists kind of tend to sort of do articulation, but not really.
So if you could pass anything on to this generation of players, these kids that are coming up, to bring us into this next generation of whatever guitar is, what would you give them? It can be one thing or a package of things. What is important that you must say to them?
I think that the most important thing is, there's so many challenges in playing well, and we can tend to, and at various times in your development, you have to be focused on any one of them, kind of disproportionately. But I think my experience has told me that it's the musical and expressive content and clarity of expression in every way in what you do that always makes the impression that you want to give. So it would be to prioritize that kind of expressive clarity and depth and levels of contrast in your playing, and be bold and daring with that, because there's something I think also in our culture, um, that sort of prevents that kind of ease with a big gesture, right? And it's kind of exactly what's needed. So even if you're a shy person, this is what you really need to do. So I mean, everyone's going to have their own personality, but I think just remembering that the thing that affects your audience is communication, right? And so what you have to always keep in mind is that you are communicating your specific ideas about the piece you're playing. And in order to do that, it has to be bold and open and done with kind of real deliberate sort of effort. So that's, I mean, one of the most important things. I probably could kind of develop a longer list of.
No, that makes sense. And that's funny because I just saw Elliot Fisk for the first time in concert. I've listened to his stuff for a long time, but finally got to see him for the first time, and that was communicated. And I'm sure you're familiar with his playing and who he is. And if there was, first of all, the playing was beautiful, the hall was beautiful, the guitar was beautiful, but I think the thing that was the loudest was his communication. And maybe that was in part of his physical gestures. Maybe if my eyes were closed, no, if my eyes were closed, I still would have heard the communication. There's such a direction and an intensity and a deliberate action to how he plays.
Mhm.
To me, I agree. As seeing that as somebody who is trying to be as expressive as I can be, I'm like,
Yeah.
this is what I need to strive for. This is the gold standard of expression. Whether or not I sound like that or not, that's a different story. But in terms of watching somebody who's really good at it, this is it.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Are there any young classical guitarists that you have your eyes on that you think are killing it with that kind of stuff?
Um, yeah, there are many. I mean, I hesitate to kind of name
Yeah, yeah.
them, like a lot of them are my own students, I think. So, but there's a lot of fantastic young players everywhere I go. I encounter young players who are just doing fantastic
Yeah.
work, at kind of very tender ages, and are kind of enthusiastic about the repertoire
Mhm.
and are playing cleanly and confidently, and with this kind of thing didn't happen uh, as much 30 and 40 years ago. So if you want to kind of say round it up to 50, I mean, as you mentioned, the level of playing um, has come to an entirely different level, and there's just so many great. Every time you can throw a stick, you're going to hit a great classical guitarist these days. So that's really encouraging, and just broadly, I would say that we are in a good place at this point with the kind of practitioners that we have, the young practitioners.
Canada is holding it down. You would be I think the fourth or fifth guest from up there. I had Tariq Harb, Ben Diamond, who I think young guy, uh,
Yep.
our mutual friend Pat Kearney, and
Hmm.
I think there's somebody else. I might be forgetting. Okay, we're gonna hit you with the lone guitarist 5 question questionnaire. You can answer these questions any way you want. Short stories, quick answers. They're fun. They're easy. Well, I don't know if they're easy. They're fun though. Are you ready? Question number one: what is the best gig you've ever had or played?
Okay, well, I'm happy to say there have been a few that I've been really happy with. I'll just give a recent one, and it was a chamber music concert. So I was invited to play with um, some very great string players, both from Ottawa, the principal cellist of the National Arts Centre Orchestra, and other great musicians from Toronto. Playing pretty standard repertoire. We played a terzetto by Paganini,
Mhm.
the Boccherini Fandango Quintet.
You play the
Uh,
whole thing?
yeah,
It's cool. It's a cool piece. We're playing. I don't mean to interrupt you. We're playing the introduction in Fandango in my quartet.
Ah, great. Yeah.
And I saw Elliot perform the whole thing like a week after we started learning it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to bring all these ideas to the.
Yeah. I mean, it's just inspiring. It was an inspiring concert.
Yeah.
Was amazed at sort of the way that the interpretation was able to just kind of leap from, first rehearsal to second rehearsal. And then we did two rehearsals and a run through, and it just came out like really beautifully. Great response from the audience. So that's a recent one anyways. And I just found that to be a really kind of peak performing experience. And I felt inspired and, kind of trying to keep up with these great string players and all that kind of stuff, and the feedback and the interaction. So, I mean, I haven't played a lot of chamber music. I mean, I played, duo for many, many years, but like most guitarists, most of my stuff has been solo work. So, yeah, that's a recent one that I found to be really, really great and kind of thrilling, and fulfilling experience.
Wonderful. Question number 2. What is the worst gig you've ever had?
Worst gig I've ever had.
Don't hesitate to go back to the rock days if that's
uh yeah, I mean, I feel like there's been a lot of gigs where I kind of have come away and we're like, yeah, it was okay. But I mean, I guess I can give like, this wasn't one that turned out bad artistically, but it was one where I was playing in a duo at the time, and we were in Europe, and we had stayed up very late the night before, and then we had this like 6 or 8 hour drive across the country. Left very early in the morning. Drove for 8 hours, kind of, before the days of GPS, trying to kind of find our way, and got there, ate I don't know, I can't remember what it was, like a piece of cheese or something. Tried to sleep, and then, rehearse for 15 minutes, and then boom, go and play. So it was one of those ones where I just thought, this is probably not going to happen. I guess, I'll just kind of stop playing and walk off stage. But anyways, there's something that kind of, but that fatigue, that level of fatigue, and just kind of not feeling really ready. Everyone's got a story like this, but that's one that kind of stands out to me in this particular gig. So it was hard. I mean, the prep of it was hard. Then actually, like once we kind of sat down and started to play, some sort of energy just sort of takes over. And actually, it turned out to be great. So, but the arduousness of the prep and the kind of pre-concert situation was memorable.
Question number 3. What's the best piece of advice you've received, and who gave it to you?
Oh, I've gotten a lot of good advice over the years. Yeah, it's going to be hard for me to sort of pinpoint. I mean, it's more of a cumulative thing, I have to say. I mean, there's one little bit of advice I can't think of it, but really it is. I think again around that sort of communication. I was taught that by a number of my teachers that communication was the goal, and so I sort of did center my work around that. So if there's probably something better, I just can't think of it in the lightning round. Sorry.
But what asking somebody this question with no preparation does is it brings out what you believe is the most important piece, even if you can't say this is the quote and this is the date and time that they gave it to me. What you're saying is exactly what is congruent with the other stuff that you've been saying, which is that communication is important, execution is important, but it's you execute in order to communicate.
Yes.
It doesn't go the other way around. Question number 4. What never fails to inspire you?
What never fails to inspire me? Well, I'm very selective about music that I sort of choose to listen to, but it doesn't take long in kind of surfing around to find great playing and great composition. And you could theoretically spend your whole day just hopping from one great performance and one great piece to another. So it's this kind of breadth of musical creativity that really inspires me. I mean, this thing is alive, and and it really is continuing to grow, and you can see the inspiration manifested in all kinds of music and in all kinds of performance. So
Yeah.
these are things that are very exciting to me, and really amazing when you think about it, just the kind of breadth of it and how it continues. So there's kind of this font of creativity and excellence that's out there at every turn.
And that's not always visible to the observer, especially something like when you go to a museum, this is what it makes me think of, and you see classical period art, and you think, oh, that's just a relic of the past, we don't do this anymore. But you realize that that had to take place in order for the expansive, overwhelming amount of styles of art there is today. And you're right, it's the same thing. The observers, in my experience, some often say, oh, so you play like old music from 200 years ago, and I say, no, that's a misnomer. We play all kinds of stuff, right? And it's exactly what you're saying.
In a more abstract way, it's a very good point, Ben, that you bring up. I mean, like if I can refine it and at the same time kind of take it to another level of abstraction, it's that historical accumulation of it as well. And
Yeah.
like history is just something, it's one of those things that I wasn't interested in history in school somehow, but the older I get, the more I'm fascinated by it, and like another thing that allows is great for us as classical musicians with this kind of 500-year history, classical guitarists especially.
Right.
We go right back to the beginning of printed music, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is this essential act of trying to acculturate yourself to the period of the music you're playing, right? So,
Mm.
that to me is like just a fascinating journey. Like if I had a time machine, I would go back instead of forward. Like, although I kind of always think about the future. I mean, if I have my choice, I would just give anything to kind of go back and kind of see what was happening at that point and get a sense of the culture. So another thing too, is we were talking earlier about, I know this is supposed to be a short answer, but I talked earlier about like this kind of early inspirations. So I talked about the recordings that my parents played, and then on my name is McFadden, of course. On the other side of my family, my mother's family is Italians, and so like I
Right.
used to gather with them all the time, and it was just organic that they would sing,
Right.
right? And so this was another kind of super formative thing, and kind of bred in this kind of long history of bel canto and Italian singing, right? And I think that just got absolutely embedded in my mind too. And so this kind of expressiveness and kind of melodic clarity and kind of, cantabile is something that, like in terms of a kind of inspiration, is always kind of very forward with me. I think it's just kind of embedded almost genetically, and it is a driving force for me.
Question number 5. What is your favorite non-guitar activity to engage in?
Uh, I have any number of them actually. So recently, what I'm doing is hiking. So I live close to the Niagara Escarpment, which people will be familiar with. It's the rock over which Niagara Falls flows.
Oh, cool.
And that escarpment, which basically is a cliff of about 300 feet, actually is not just at Niagara Falls, but it kind of goes it's kind of like the backbone of the province of Ontario, and it kind of goes around even into the United States. It's this giant formation. So there's a trail that started to be assembled, and the land bought up and so forth as a conservancy around the time that I was born. And so this has been in place for a long time. It's 900 miles, 900 kilometers,
Wow.
Canadian miles through through the
The conversion rate is like,
no, that's the other thing too. Like this, we used to be on imperial measure when I was a kid, and then like when I was about 8 or 10, something, it switched and we went to metric. So like I understand neither of them, but let's say it's 900 kilometers from Queenston in Ontario, the next to Lewiston in the United States, to this place called Tobermory. So anyways, my goal is to walk or hike the entirety of it
oh, wow.
over the course of however long it takes. So I'm in the middle of doing that. That's one thing I really love doing. And aside, like from the thousands of musical things that I like doing, I also, believe it or not, became slightly obsessed, and always have been, kind of in a quiet way, with coins.
Mm.
That's this historical thing, so I've over the years put together a kind of collection of first of all, trying to get all the Canadian coins ever minted and that kind of stuff. So I have this sort of obsession with kind of, completing, I guess. So I want to do all the Bruce Trail, get all the Canadian coins, so.
You have a do you have a room dedicated to guitars and then next to it a room dedicated to coins?
Well, spaces. I mean, I don't have that much, that many rooms to account for all the hobbies, but yeah, I do have spaces for those things. Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And the next time you come down to Connecticut, I will make sure to actually say hi this time instead of lurking in the corners.
No, that sounds great. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Ben, and best of luck with your series. It's great, and it's been really nice to have a chance to talk to you.